Hello everyone, my name is Nancy and today I will be talking to you about the research paper, The Thresholds for the McGurk Effect in Audio-Visual Noise Decreases with Development. What is the McGurk effect? The McGurk effect is illusion. It basically is the change in auditory perception due to visual speech. This results in hearing something that is not being said. So I'm going to show you a short video clip just so you can have an idea of what the McGurk effect is.
ba 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 ba.
The researchers wanted to understand how our vision influences our audio-visual perception. Usually during a conversation, if you're the listener, you may utilize both vision and audition to understand speech. So they wanted to see if you altered one, would it affect the other? So this is why they used the McGurk effect, which, as I mentioned, is an illusion where audio perception is altered because of visual speech. So this paper also sought to discover how age can have different outcomes on perception. They wanted to see that as you got older, would your visual auditory dominance change? What do I mean by visual auditory dominance? If you're presented with an audio-visual example, if you were visually dominant, you would respond more to the visual component as opposed to the auditory component. The researchers hypothesized that young children require auditory stimulus in order to respond to the McGurk effect correctly, while adults' perception was altered by visual speech. The development causes a switch in sensory dominance. So what this means is they hypothesized that children were more auditory dominant compared to adults that what they thought would be visually dominant. So they also believe that the adult level was reached by the age of 10 and that the McGurk responses would be affected by thresholds of either less auditory noise or more visual noise. So there has been previous research done on this topic. One of them was Slawski and Napolitano in 2003. They conducted a study where they discovered that perception in children is dominated by audition. Then another study was also done, Tremblay et al. 2007, received results from the McGurk effect, where children aged 5 to 9 years made correct auditory responses with the rate of 60% correct, while people ages 10 to 19 dropped to 20% correct auditory responses. There was also another research done by Stacy, Howard, Mitra, and Stacy, 2017. They discovered that after the McGurk effect was demonstrated, there were elevated levels of dominance in auditory perception when vision was impaired. For this research, they used two groups of child samples just because they thought that research was not done as much on children as it was done on adults. So they had a sample of 29 children, 3 to 6 year olds, 32 children, 7 to 9 year olds, and 29 children, 10 to 12 year olds. They were recruited in a large public event where they were all able to participate. Then the second child sample was 96 children with the age of 3 to 12 years old. This was in a summer scientist week in the University of Nottingham. And then the adult sample was 32 young adults with age of 20 to 35. Participants were staff and students at the University of Nottingham. Participants were presented with visual and audio stimulus, which were videos of a female who vocalized one of these three syllables, ba, ga, and da. It's similar to the video I showed you in the beginning of the presentation. So they had different examples of how they would present the audio-visual stimulus. So one of them was congruent. What that means is that they would show both ga and ga, as in the visual ga and the auditory ga, and then the incongruent sound would be visual ga and then the auditory ba. They also used a threshold approach where they altered your vision or they raised the auditory to see how that would affect your audiovisual perception. So as a result of this research, children ages 3 to 6 and 7 to 9 gave more correct ba responses as opposed to adults. Children ages 3 to 6 and 7 to 9 did not significantly differ from each other. And the correct auditory responses decreased as age increased at a rate of 1.57%. This means that as you got older, you became more visually dominant, which is why the correct auditory responses decreased as you got older. They also had results that adults required more visual noise to avoid McGurk responses compared to children ages 3 to 6 and 7 to 9, but were not significantly different from 10 to 12-year-olds. So this basically means that again, adults were more visually dominant, and that this dominance began around the age of 10 to 12 years old, which is why adults did not differentiate significantly from the 10 to 12-year-olds. They also discovered that thresholds were not significantly different for all three age groups of children. The researchers' findings conclude that the influence of vision audition increases across development, meaning that once you get older, you are more visually dominant, and the age in which you reach this visual dominance is by the ages of 10 to 12. So they also had visual noise reduce and auditory noise increase, which affected the amount of correct answers. So since vision was blurred, it increased correct answers. They also expected children to have been more susceptible to noise change due to audio dominance. They also expected adults to require less visual noise to prevent McGurk responses because they were also visually dominant, but this did not occur, so they concluded that children were more sensitive to audio changes and adults were more sensitive to visual changes.